Hi everyone and welcome. So in this tutorial, we'll be creating the backend REST API with the Next.js version 13. So earlier we created a simple CRUD API with the Next.js 13, but now it's time to move on to the advanced things. So in this version of the API, we'll be creating a social media type API, which is a Twitter. So we have a Twitter type API this time in which there are the users and there are the tweets. And the users can post multiple tweets and each tweet can have one single user associated with it. So we'll be using the Prisma, we'll be using the MongoDB for creating this API, and you can integrate it with any social media platform. So the similar functionality works for the Instagram as well. So there are the users and there are the posts. So the user can publish as many posts as they want, but one post is associated to one single user. So we have this type of functionality and we have already integrated the login and the sign up functionalities as well. So if you want to integrate it with any front end application, so it's ready. And if you want me to integrate, then please comment on the video and I will be doing that inside the next video. So it would be very exciting project. So without wasting much time, let's dive into it. So let's learn that how to build the social media API with the Next.js version 13. The CRUD API with the Next.js. So let's move on. Let's have a look the project stacks that we are using. So we'll be using the Next.js version 13, which is a full stack framework. We'll be using the Prisma, which is a database management tool, which is used to work efficiently with the databases. Like it can work with any type of database, whether it's a MongoDB, whether it's a PostgreSQL, whether it's a MySQL. So you can use any type of database and it provides you a helper functions which can insert the records, and the helper functions are same if you use any type of database. So they are completely same, and even if you want to use a different database, so this code would be supported in any type of database which is integrated. So in this course, we'll be using the MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database that we'll be using. So with all of that, we'll be creating a REST API. So let's move on and let's dive into the workflow of what we'll be doing. So we'll be building the REST API and we have the server of the Next.js. So we'll be creating the API, we'll be having the server, and we'll be doing the testing of the API via the Postman. So that's the motto of this application, so that you can learn about the API with the Next.js, because the modern applications use the Next.js for building the APIs. So if you want to use the Next.js, then you should create the API with the Next.js itself. So in this course, we'll be creating the REST API. So that's a tutorial for the REST API, and we won't be creating the front end for this. In future, maybe we can do that. But as of now, we are just creating the REST API project with the Next.js, and we'll be testing the API with the Postman. So let's move on and let's dive into the Next.js. So let's move on and let's just create a Next.js application. So here I am into the Windows PowerShell. So here we want to initialize a new Next.js application. So the command is very simple. So we just need to run a command that can be npx, we can be a create, that can be the next, that can be the app, and that should be equals to @latest. So with the help of this command, we'll be creating a brand new Next.js application. And you can see after that, it will ask you for a couple of prompts, like what is your project name? So we can have the tweets API. So we have this application. Would you like to use the TypeScript? So yes, we can use the TypeScript. ESLint, yes. Tailwind as well, we can use yes, but we won't be creating the front end as of now. The source directory, we can click on the no. The app router, yes. And would you like to customize the default import alias? So we can hit on the yes. So the default import alias will be, we can use the @ like that. So let's move on, and after a couple of seconds, it will initialize a new Next.js application that will be ready to be used. So the new Next.js application has been created, and now we can directly move on into the directory. So we have the tweets API like that. So we can move on into this, and then we can run our code editor. So you are free to choose any code editor. But here inside this course, we'll be using the Visual Studio Code. So I'm running the command of the code, and after that, we'll be having the period. So after all of that, it will just move on to the Visual Studio Code. So let's move on. So here we are into the welcome screen. So let's see that what we have. First, we have the app directory, which is responsible for the routing purposes. So we can create the front end and both API routes within this app directory. So if you want to create the front end route, so the page.tsx would be helpful for a front end routing. And if you want to get the API route, and the reserved name for that is route.tsx. And inside the front end, we have the route layout. And if you want to create a new route, that can be supposed inside the home page, this page file would run, and we have the layout, which is wrapping the whole page content. So this children is actually the page content inside any of the directory. So this page would run into the domain name slash nothing. So inside the home page of your domain, this page.tsx would work. But if we move on, if we need to define a new route, that can be, we can have the about like that. And if we want to create a new page, so we can create a page.tsx like that. And this page would run, it can be a domain name slash about. And after that, this page would be get reflected there. So that's how the app directory works with the Next.js. And same for the API. If you want to create the API, so instead of the page, you can choose this as a route.tsx. So you can rename it as the route.tsx to create a new route with that. So now you can create the API request. So now you can send the API request to your domain name slash about, and this route file would handle all of your incoming API request. So I'm going to delete it now, and let's move on to the node modules. So these are the packages which runs under the hood, which makes your app work. And then we have the public folder, which can be used for having the assets inside your application. So you can store your public assets there inside the public folder. Then we have the ESLint file, which is used for the linting purposes of your code. Like sometimes there can be extra spacing, or sometimes there can be unused variables. So that's where the ESLint comes. So it provides you those errors. Then you have the git ignore file. So once you publish your code to the GitHub, so I hope you know about the GitHub. So once you publish your application to the GitHub, so then these files wouldn't be sent there. So these file would be ignored. Like that can be a coverage file, the next file, the out file, the build file of our application, and so many things. So these file wouldn't get there. And then we have the next environment file, which is used for the environment purposes. Then we have the next configuration file as well. And from this configuration, you can use and you can enable some of the customizations of the Next.js. You can see you have a lot of customizations. You can just extend them as well. You can use the experimental features of the Next.js as well. You can allow them directly from here. And now let's move on. Now we have the package.json file, which contains the information about your application, like the name of our application. So this is a whole package of your application. So this is a whole new npm package that you can use. So the name of the package is that to its API, it's a private, and you can see there are some couple of commands. Like if you want to run your application inside the development mode, then you need to write the dev. If you want to build your application for the production, for the deployment, then you need to run the command of the build. And if you want to start your application for the production version, then you need to use the start command over there. So dev is used for the development, but if you have built your application for the production and if you want to test that out, then it is the start command. And there's a command of the lint, which is used to provide you the linting errors that we have discussed here. And then you have some dependency down there. You have the types of the node, types of the React DOM, and make sure these types are there inside the dev dependencies and not inside the dependencies, because these packages that you define over there is included into your bundle of your application. And adding some extra dependencies like the types of the React node and the React DOM could increase the size of the bundle. So let's see the post CSS. So it is used for the tailwind configuration of your application. Then finally you have the README, and inside the README what you can do, so you can provide some information about your application. Then you have the tailwind configuration file in which you can configure your tailwind. Like you can see you have the content. So after the pages or components or app, if tailwind finds any of the JavaScript or TypeScript or JSX or TSX or MDX files, so it will add the auto completion or the IntelliSense of the tailwind. So that's how it works. Then you have the theme property. You can extend the theme of the tailwind. But here inside this application, as we discussed, that we won't be touching the front end part, so it's useless for us. Then we have the TS configuration file, which is used for the configurations of the TypeScript within this application. So that's all for the folder directories. So now let's move on and let's just work on our API. So maybe there was one change inside there, so we can just undo that change. So let's move on and let's just start building this application. So for building the API, as we discussed, that we'll be using the Prisma. So what we can do, so we can move on to the Prisma documentation to get started. So here we have the documentation of the Prisma. You can just click on the get started. But before moving on directly, so let's discuss that what exactly is the Prisma. I'm going to explain you more about it before moving on to the development. So Prisma ORM is a database management tool that simplifies your data interaction and providing a type-safe API and query builder for efficient data operations in software development. So what exactly is all this about? So it works with your database. Like firstly, what it does, so you integrate your database URL with the Prisma, and then it gets connected to your database. And after that, it creates some models of your database. So it creates some models, like that can be collections as well of your MongoDB. So it creates some of the models like user model. It creates the schema of the user model. Then if you have any different model, then you can provide that schema for that as well. So it provides them query builder functions to create a record, to update, to get a record for all of the CRUD operations for the efficient database operations. So that's how the Prisma works. And you can use any type of database with the Prisma, which are supported by them. So you can move on and then you can search about that, like how many databases are supported by there. And I think there are around 5 to 6 databases that are supported there with the Prisma. So all of the query builder functions are same for any type of database that is integrated to the Prisma. So that's the power of the Prisma inside the modern applications. So let's move on and let's just install the Prisma inside our application. So the steps are very simple. So you just need to move on into the terminal of your application. So you can have the Control J to open this terminal tab. So first you need to install the Prisma. So you can have the npm install and you can have the -d, and that should be equals to the Prisma. So we need to install the Prisma as a development dependency. So let's install that right now. So the Prisma has been installed. And now the next step that we want to do, so now we have just installed the Prisma, but Prisma is not there inside our application. So we need to initialize the Prisma for this project. So the command to that is npx. We have the Prisma that can be init. It initializes a Prisma inside this application and it adds a couple of files and folders there. You can see the first folder that it adds is the Prisma folder itself. So inside the Prisma folder, there you have the schemas. You can see you have the schemas of our application. You can provide multiple models there. And after that, it creates the environment variable of your application. You can see that contains a database URL. So you can host your database anywhere. So you can use any hosted database. So you can use a cloud version as well. So that is a database URL that we need to provide. And inside the schema.prisma, you can see you have the provider, and you can see if you remove that and if you press Ctrl and the space, you can see these are the providers that are supported by the Prisma. So there are the databases, like there are around 6 databases that are supported by the Prisma. You can use any one of them and you can use their deployed URLs there with the database URL. So let's move on and let's just work with the MongoDB down there. So we have the MongoDB, and after that, let's move on and let's just connect the MongoDB database with this application. So here I'm into the mongodb.com, and from this drop down we need to create a brand new project. So you can have the new project down there, and like that you can have the Prisma, you can have the Next.js like that. So and then you can click on the next, so it will create your brand new project. Then you can click on the create project, and after that, now what do we need to do as the next step? So after that, you can see now a project is created, but now we need to build a new database. So we'll be building a free database for now. So let's click on this button, and there you can see here we have 3 approaches. And if you want to have the M10, then it's a paid version that provides you 2 CPUs. And if you want to use the serverless, then you can see you can use the serverless approach as well, and it's great approach. And then we have the M0, which is free for learning and exploring the MongoDB in a cloud environment. So let's use this version over there, and let's just click on the create. So you can keep these settings at default. You can click on the create, and it will create your brand new cluster. So let's hit on verify. So let's see what happens now. You can see now it is now created, and now you can see now with the security start as well. So how we'll be connecting to the database? So we need to provide the username and the password. So we can have the username, like I'm giving my username like the Anthadani, and I'm going to copy this password somewhere. So this password is now saved there. And now let's move on. Let's just click on create user. And after that, you need to add your environment from where you can access your database. So what you need to do over there, so you can just move on, you can just add the IP address. So you can have your current IP address as well. But if you want your application to be connected from everywhere, you can just click on the finish and close, and you can just move on to the network access down there. And inside there, what you need to do, from there you can just edit that, and then you can just allow the access from anywhere, from any IP address. So you can click on the confirm down there, and now you can move on to the database option there. So here you have the database option. You can just click on the connect, and from there you can just have the drivers, and from there you have the connection URL. So now you have the connection URL of the MongoDB database. So you can just copy that down there, and then you can move on into the environment variable. So here we have the database URL. So instead of defining the default, now we need to use our own database URL. And there you can see we need to provide the password as well instead of the string. So we have already stored the password there. So let's cut that from here, and let's just paste that here. And after that, you have the MongoDB.NET, and after that, it provides you an option to have your database name. So you can have the test DB like that. So here we have the test DB, or if you want to have the database name, so you can have the tweets like that. So you can have the tweets like that. And now the next step would be, now we want to define the models of our application. So what models that we'll be using? So models are just schemas. So we have a records, like we have the documents inside the collection. So each document should contain several things. The things that it should contain, we need to define that inside the schema. So that is a model. So let's move on and let's just define the model. So there can be two models inside this application, and let's just discuss all of them. So here we have the models. So we have two models, the user and the tweets. So the user can have the ID, the user can have the name, the email and the password, and the user can have the tweet as well. So the tweets would be an array. So these are the properties of the user. And then we have the tweets as well. So the tweets is a collection. We have the ID. So each tweet can contain the ID. Each tweet can contain the tweet text as well, the date, the edited date, and the user as well. So these are the models that we need to define, but we need to relate them as well, because the user can have multiple tweets. So we need to keep a record that what are the tweets that are acquired or that are created by the user. So let's just move on and let's just see the relations between them. So the relations that we have, you can see here we have the model relations. So inside the relations, first let's see the types. So we have the type of the ID, that is the object ID, and here as well we have the object ID of the type. The name, the email, and the password have the string, and the tweet has the string. The date has the date. The edited date is a new date. Once again, then we have the tweet. So tweet is an array of multiple tweet models. So there can be multiple tweet documents like that. So that's why we have provided the tweet document as the array. Then we have the user down there. So each tweet can have one single user. So that's the relation between them. So the user to tweets is a one-to-many relationships, and each tweet can have only one single user attached to it. So that's the relations between the user and the tweets within this application. So that's it for the models and the relations. So now let's move on and let's just build this API. So now let's define the models that we have discussed. So we can have the model. So we can have the model that can be the user. So we have the user model like that, and it contains some of the fields, like it contains the ID, and the ID that we need to define, we can have this string type, and then that is a ID. So we need to provide the identifier that is @ID. So it marks as the ID of this document. Then we want to have the default ID as well, because the MongoDB provides you the ID by default. So you can use the default option, and inside there you can have the auto. So it means like the ID would be automatically generated by default. And after that, the MongoDB provides you the ID as the underscore ID. Like this, the MongoDB provides you the document like the underscore ID like that. So you need to map this ID. So for that, you need to have the @map, and that should be @ID like that. And that should be underscore ID like that. And then it is an object ID. So we need to add the DB dot, we can have the object ID like that. So that's the ID inside the MongoDB database that we want to define. And after that, now what do we need to do as the next step? So the user can have the name, that is a type of the string. The user can have the email as well, that is a type of the string. The user can have the password as well after that. So the password is again type of the string. And then we need to define the model for the tweets as well. So we can have the model that should be equals to, we can have the tweets once again. And inside there, we have the ID. We have the same type for the ID. We have the tweet. And then we can have the date as well. So we can have the created date. So we can have the created date, and inside down there what we can do. So we can have the date time like that, and that is equals to what we can use. So we can again provide the default that we did for the ID. So we can have either default, and that should be equals to, we can have the now. So we have a function like it would be created. So once the document would be created, it stores the timestamp into the created date. Then we can have the edit it as well. So we can have the updated date, and that is again the type of the date time like that. And after that, now what do we need to do? So once the document is updated, so we have a property inside the Prisma that we can use for the updated date. So it automatically updates the updated date from this updated date and with the updated date. And then it won't be having the password, but now we need to add the relations. So the model user can have the tweets. So we can have the tweets, and there is a type of the tweets like that. So that's an array of the tweets. And once you save that, you can see now the model creates your relation automatically like that. So we have the user, then we have the user ID, and that's how it works. So the user is a required property, so we can remove the optional parameter down there. And then you can see the user ID is also required, so we need to have it required. So inside the user, you can see we have the user object. So we have a type of the user, then we have the relation down there. So this field of the user ID, it means like this is a relation. So the source is this ID, the user ID, and the destination is the ID that we have inside the user ID. So that's how it is connected. And then we need to add another function, which is a on delete. So we can have the on delete. It means like the once the tweet is deleted, so we need to delete it from the user's tweet array as well. So we can have the option of the cascade. So we have the option of the cascade. So once the tweet is deleted, so it will also be deleted from the tweets array of the user. And that's all for that. So that's all for the schema. And now what do we want to do as the next step? So the next step is very simple. So now we need to sync these models to a database as well. So we need to run a command of the npx. We can have the Prisma. That can be db, that can be equals to the push. So we need to run this command. So it will push all of your changes of the models to your database. So you can have the allow access, and then after that, it will be in sync with your database. So let's wait for a couple of seconds still there. So you can see now your database is now in sync with your Prisma schema. And then you can see now it has installed a new package, which is a Prisma client. So Prisma client, so what is a client of the Prisma? So again, this is used for the development purpose. This is used to just sync your database with the Prisma. And the Prisma client is a client function, like it can be an API which provides you the query builder that we have discussed. So it provides you the query builder functions like creating a record, updating, mutating something, or getting a query records. So Prisma client is responsible for that. So let's move on and let's just work with the Prisma client. So inside the Prisma, we want to create a new file that can be the index.ts. So you can see it automatically has created your Prisma client. So you don't need to install a new package for the client. So let's move on and let's just create your own client. So it has also created a Prisma client, but this can give you some errors. So once your application is in production mode, so sometimes the Prisma generates one or more clients. So the Prisma client, so each application should have one Prisma client, but sometimes during the modules, it creates multiple instances. So we need to prevent that. So we need to move on into the Prisma, and then we need to define our own Prisma client over there. So you can refer to a GitHub gist. So here you can see here we have the gist. So it is a customized Prisma client which will prevent this error. So what you need to do, so it is very simple. So what we are doing here, so we are declaring a new global module that can be a Prisma client, and from there what we are doing, so we are providing the namespace, the Node.js, we have the interface of the global, and then we have the Prisma, which is a type of the Prisma client, and from there we just have a simple validation check. So if the process.env node, we have the production mode currently, so that can be a new Prisma client, or else the global.prisma is always a new Prisma client if we don't have that. So that is just a basic condition over there. So what you need to do, so you can just click on the row and you can copy the whole client down there. You can paste that here and you will be facing some error. So what you can do at the top, so you can have @ts, that can be no check because it's a database operations and some properties can be available after some time. So we need to add the no check for the TypeScript so that we skip checking with the types. So we are all set. And now what do we want to do as the next step? So we want to just move on, and then we want to just build our API. So for creating the API, we can move on to the app folder. We can close all of them. With the app folder, we can just create a new API folder like that. So you can move on into the app down there. And from there, you can create a new folder that can be API. And you are not required to create your API and then provide your API routes down there. So inside the app router, if you provide the route.tsx, then it would automatically become a HTTP route. So you are not required to create the API, but that's up to you. So inside the API, now what do we want to do? So we can have the route. So the route can be first, we can have the users. So we can have the users, and inside down there, we can create the route.ts file for the user. So this users would handle the incoming request on this API route, which is the localhost, or that can be domain/API/users. And after we move on to /users, then this file would handle the incoming request, which is made to that route, which is made to that endpoint. So let's move on. Let's define the function. So inside the route file, you need to define HTTP verbs functions that can be accepted by this route. That can be the get, that can be post, put, delete, update. So you can have all of the route functions that you need to define over there. So first, let's define the get function over there. So you can have the export, const, you can have the get, and that is a reserved name. So you need to use the get like this. So that should be equals to an asynchronous arrow function. And the parameters that you get is the request. So you get the request over there, and type is the request. So it is an extended version of the web request API. So inside the MDN, you will see a request API, but the Next.js has extended that, and it has added some of the features of the Next.js as well. And after that, let's move on. So here we have the get function. So inside there now, what do we want to do? So first we want to connect to the database, and then we want to retrieve all of the records of the users. So as per the API route suggest. So inside the root directory of your application, you can create a new folder that can be, we can have the utils, and from this folder, you can have the index.ts. So you have the utils over there, and from the utility file, you can move on, and then you can define your utility functions that can be used for building the API. So the first utility function that we want is connecting to database. So let's move on. So we can have the export, const, we can connect to DB. So that is a connect to DB, and that is a function, and it is an arrow function, and it is an asynchronous function. And after that, now what do we want to do is the next step. So after this async, you need to move on, and you need to define a function which can connect your application to the database. And we'll be using the try catch block for that. And inside the try, what do we want to do? We just need to have the await. We can have the Prisma. So we need to import the Prisma, and it should be imported from this Prisma file. And then we can have dot, we can have the connect. So this will connect our application to the Prisma. And after that, if we face any error, or if we have something with that, so if we face any error, then we can move on, then we can have the return like that. So we can have the return new error, that should be equals to the error itself like that. So we can have the error dot, we can have the message like that. So that's how it's going to work. So we need to define the type as well, like the any, so that we get the message property like that. So that's how it's going to work. So actually it's an error, so it should be the error like that. So now we have one helper function down there. And now let's move on to, I think, into the route.ts. And now we need to move on to the route.ts. And here, what do we need to do? So here we have the const get. So again, we can use the try catch like that. So inside the try catch, inside the try, we need to just have the await. We can have the connect to DB. So here we have the connect to DB down there. So we can have the, so we can have connect to DB, and after our application is connected to database, then we can move on, and then we can just fetch all of the records of the user. So our user is mapped. So our user collection is mapped to the Prisma, and we have a model of the user. So what do we need to do? So we can have the const, we can have the users. So that should be equal to the await, and we can again import the Prisma client here, and dot, we can have the user. You can see the user is mapped to the Prisma client function, and that's a query builder. And from there, you can get all of the functions that are supported by the Prisma. You can see the Prisma supports all of these functions. So with the help of these functions, like if you want to get all of the records, you can have the find many. So you can call this function. And if you provide some query inside that, so it will find all of the records which matches the specific query. And now inside the users, you will be getting all of the users. And now the next step would be, now we want to return the response. So if the front end has requested something, then it means like they want to get some response as well. So now we want to send the response, and sending the response is very easy. So we can have the return, and then we can import something from the Next.js, which from the next server, that is the next response. So it's a customized response that you can make with the Next.js, and that is the JSON. So we want to send the JSON data, then we can send the whole users object down there. So we can have the users, and inside the second parameter, that's an object which have the headers, the configuration, the status as well. So you can have the status of 200 because the status of the HTTP request is 200 once everything is successful. So that's how it works. And now we want to move on to the catch as well. So if we get an error, first what we can do, so we can log that error over there. So we can log the error, and after logging the error, then we can move on. We can have the next response. We can have the error like that. So we can have the error, and that should be, we can have the error dot message like that. So we can define the type, that should be equals to the any. So that's how it's going to work. And now we have the get function. So if we just run this API, now we can run the get function and it's okay. But after that, what do we need to do? So we need to disconnect our application from the database as well. Because as we discussed earlier, so the Prisma should have one instance for the whole application. So we can have the finally block over there. So we can have the finally, and inside down there, we can have the await. That should be equals to Prisma.disconnect. So we have a function of the Prisma.disconnect, which disconnects your application to the Prisma. And that's how it's going to work. And after that, you can see now we have the get request. So now if we make the API to the database, so now what do we get? So we get all of the users from the database from the users collection. But now we don't have any user. So what do we need to do? So instead of getting the empty array, so now let's define the post request as well. So we can just get a new user. So now let's define the post request as well. So from the post request, now what we'll be doing? So we'll be having the user sign up with that. So we need to create a brand new user, and that is available from the user sign up. So we need to create a separate API endpoint for that. So inside the API, let's create a new folder that can be equals to, we can have this sign up like that. And from the sign up route, now what do we want to do? So we can have the route.ts. So this route will handle once we make the request to API endpoint of the sign up. So inside the sign up, that would be a post request. So first of all, let's just copy all of that and let's just paste that here. And what do we want to do as the next step? So here we won't be getting the get request. So we'll be getting the post request down there. And on the inside the post, we'll be getting the request as well. And that's okay. And now you can see, now we want to create a brand new user. But before that, now we want to get the data as well from the front end. So how will we be getting that? So we'll be sending the JSON data from the front end. So we'll be sending the JSON data, and to extract the JSON data, so there's a function inside the request to extract the data. So you can have the const, you can have the properties that you want to destructure. That should be equals to the await, and that should be equals to request.json. So it's a promise. So once it gets resolved, so you get all of the properties that are sent via the front end. For creating a new user, we need the name, we need the email, we need the password. So we have the name, email, and the password. And after that, what do we want to do? So we want to connect to database. Then we want to create a new record. And for creating a new record, it is very easy. So again, we have the user model. Then we have the create. So if you want to create many records, then you can create many. So we want to create one single record. So we can have the create. And inside down there, we want to include the data. You can see we just want to have the data down there. And the data should be equals to, we can have the name, we can have the email, and we can have the password as well. So that's how we'll be creating a brand new record of the user, and that is a user down there. So that is a user. And now one thing to mention. So one thing is, what do we want to do? So you can see we are getting the string directly from the JSON, and you can see the string inside the database would be stored as the same string of the password. So you're getting the password like that. So you're getting the exact password from the user for the sign up. But inside the database, if you store the exact password, so suppose the employee is working in the database, so that can see your password. So because they are working in the backend, so they can see your password. So what do we want to do here? So you can encrypt your password. So you can encrypt your password. So for password encryption, you need to use a library which is a bcrypt, and it is a popular library for the Node.js. So we can have the npm install, we can have the bcrypt like that. So we can have the bcrypt. So it is used to encrypt the password or encrypt any string that you want to encrypt. And you want to encrypt the string into the non-readable format so that the simple user cannot able to see that what exactly is inside the string. So let's move on. So here we have the user. And after that, what do we want to do? Before that, we need to create a password. So we can have the hashed password, and that should be equals to, we can have the await. Then we can have the bcrypt here. So we can have the bcrypt. We need to import that. So we can have the import, we can have something that should be equals to, we can have the bcrypt, and then we can just import the whole bcrypt library as well. We can have the bcrypt like that. And there we have some error, like you can see the declaration file is not there. So we can just install the declaration files as well with this command. So we can have the npm install this. So let's install that as well. And after that, now we'll be having all of the functions that we want to define. So we can have the bcrypt down there. Then we can have the hash. So we can have the hash. And if you want to use the synchronous version of the hash, then you can use the hash sync. But here we'll be using the hash. So the first parameter that we want to provide, that can be a string or a buffer. So we can provide a string that should be equal to the password string that we are getting. And inside the second parameter, now what do we want to do? So we need to provide the rounds. So how many rounds it will be used for the encryption? So one round is equals to, you can see the technique one is generate a salt, and then you can see it provides you all of the methods of generating a salt. So the more number of rounds that you provide inside the bcrypt, so the more secure password that you have. So by default that can be 10. So we have the 10 rounds for the encryption. And that's how it's going to work. So now we have the hashed password. So now instead of the password directly that will be using this property, we can use the hashed password like that. So that's how it's going to work. And the status that can be equal to 201. So now I have missed one thing here. You can see now we are destructuring the values. So if you want to have the validation checks over there, and that's okay, you can create the validation checks. So here you can have the validation checks as well if you want to add. So if you don't have the name, or if you don't have the email, or if you don't have the password, so what you need to do, so you need to return before making any connection or before doing anything. So let's move on. So you can see now we have the next response.json. So we can use the JSON over there. Now the next response.json, you have the error message, and the error that should be equals to, we can have the invalid data. Then we have the invalid data, and the status can be 422, which is unprocessable entity, like the data cannot be processed. So that's a validation check from us. And now what do we want to do as the next step? So everything seems to be working fine now. And one thing there I noticed, so you can see once we are getting the error, the status should be 500 instead of the 200, because that's a server error. And same should be used down there. So that should be equals to, so we can have the 500 down there. So let's run this application. So we can have the npm run dev, and let's just test the sign up route over there. So now you can move on to the Postman, and if you haven't installed the Postman yet, then you can just directly download it from the Google, and the steps are very simple. So I'm going to close all tabs down there. First close all of the tabs, and now we want to create a brand new tab. Now we want to provide the URL. That can be, we can have the HTTP. So that should be equals to, we can have the local host, the port of 3000 / we can have the API / we can have this sign up. So we can have the sign up route down there. Then we can move on. We can provide the request as the post. We can provide the body, that can be raw, that can be the JSON, and inside down there we can have the name. So that can be equals to, we can have the Nikhil down there. Then we can have the email as well. So we can have the Nikhil @ we can have the test.com. Then we can have the password. That should be equals to, we can have any password like 1 2 3 4 5 6 like that. So if we just click on this send, you can see now it will create a brand new record inside the database. So let's just wait until it connects. You can see now we have the user which is created inside the database. You have the ID of the user which is just created. You have the name, you have the email, you have the password. You can see this is the password. Like you can see you send this password to database, but you got the password which is this encrypted password. So you can't even just think that this was the password with this string. So let's move on. So you can see now you have created a user. So now let's just create a GET request to get the users. So we have the endpoint of the users. So let's see what happens. If we just send a new GET request, you can see now you got the array of the users, and the first object that we have is the Nikhil. So everything seems to be working perfectly fine. I know what do we want to do as the next step. So now we have the sign up, and then we can have the user login as well. So inside the front end, if you want to have the user login functionality or so many things, so you can have the login down there. So with the API, you can have the login as well. So you can have the login, and inside the login, now what do we want to do? So again, we can have the route.ts. So you have the route.ts, and you need to just copy the sign up route from there. You can just paste that here inside this, and most of the things would be similar. Like you can see inside this, now what do we want to do? So we want to get the email and the password from the body instead of the name as well. So we want to get the email and the password. So we can just have the validation for the name, for the email and the password. And now what do we want to do as the next step? So here that function would be different with that. And what do we want to do as the next step? So we want to remove this as well. So let's move on. So after we are connecting to the database, then first we need to fetch a record with this email. So we can have the const, we can have the user, we can have the existing user. So that should be equals to await. We can again refer to the Prisma dot, we can have here the model of the user. Then we can have the find one. So we can have the find first here, and from there you can provide the where query, like the where, the ID, or we can have the email. That should be the email that we are getting. So it will find a user which has this email of them, which has this email. So it will find a user, and after that, now what do we want to do? So what do we want to do as the next step? So we can have the email as well, and here we can just check, like if we don't have the existing user, then what do we want to do as the next step? So then we can move on, and then we can just return the response. So we can have the return the next response like that, and we can have the message, like we can have the user not registered. So we have the user not registered message, and the status can be, we can have the 401, which is unauthorized. So that's how it's going to work. And now the next step that we want to do, you can see now we have the validation check, and now we want to just check the password of the user. So now we want to match the password with the actual password. You can see the user only knows this password that he is sending, suppose 1234556. So now what do we want to do as the next step? So the user don't know that this password is being stored to the database. So we need to fetch, so we need to decrypt this password, and then we need to verify like if the password is the actual password that the user is sending or not. So that process is very simple. So you need to move on, and you need to define a variable that can be is password, you can have the correct like that, and that should be equals to await. We can again have the bcrypt there. So we can have the bcrypt dot, we can have the compare. So we can use the compare, and then we want to compare the data string, the exact string, which is the password like that. So the compare should be equals to, we can have the password of the user. Then inside the second parameter, we need to provide the encrypted string, which is available inside the existing user dot password like that. So that's how we'll be getting that. So it will return a Boolean value that can be true or false. So we need to check by this condition, like if we have the is password correct, or we can have a validation, like if the password is not correct, then we want to just return a response once again. So we can just again return this response, like we can have the error, like we can have invalid password. Then we can have the status that should be equals to, we can have the 403. And after that, the next step that we want to do, like if everything is correct, then we need to just send the user details. Like we can send the existing user. Inside the user, that can be existing user, or inside the login, what we can do, so we can send the message, and that can be, we can have the logged in like that. So the message can be the logged in, and that's how it's going to work. And now what do we want to do? The status is 200 instead of the 21. So it means success. So that will all be for the login route, and that's how it's going to work. And now the next step that we want to do, you can see we want to move on to the route, and inside down there, you can see inside the sign up route, we missed one step. Like if the user is already registered, then what do we want to do? Then we can have the validation check over there with the email. So you can have the validation check inside the sign up as well. Like if the user is already registered with the same email, so you can do that with the schema as well. So with the schema.prisma, you can move on to the email. You can provide a property that can be the unique. So with the help of unique, so now the email would be unique every time. But it's a good practice, like if you have the validation check over there as well. So we can again have that. So we can have the, if we have the existing user like that, we can have the const, we can have the existing user. That should be equals to, we can move on. And here we can have the await. That should be equals to, we can have the prisma dot user dot, we can have the find first. And if we find a user where the email is this, then we want to just move on. We can have the if existing user. Then what do we want to do? Then we can move on, and then we can just return the error message. We can return the next response once again. So we have the next response. That should be equals to, we're going to the message, and that is user already registered. Please log in. So we can have this message over there, and this is good for the front end as well. So for the front end team, that is good because they know that the user is already registered, so the application cannot be a mess. Then what we can do, the status can be, we can again have the 403, which is forbidden. And now what after that, now what do we want to do as the next step? So now let's just try out the login as well. So we can move on, that can be API, that should be, we can have the login. And then if we just send a post request to this, now we won't be needing the name. So let's move on. Let's just click on the send. And here you can see now we got the message that is logged in. So everything seems to be fine. But here you can see once we change the password, like 1234556, instead I will add the 1 as well in the end. So let's see what happens. So you can see now we are getting the error, that's invalid password, and everything seems to be working fine. And if we have different email, like we have the Nikhil, like we can have the Nikhil 1 as well to check the email validation as well. So you can see now we got a message that the user not registered. So everything seems to be working fine. So you can see now the user registration has been completed. So that's a huge step that we have completed. And now you can see the user can sign up, the user can log in. So we are not providing the JWT token yet because now it's a simple application. So we won't be doing this inside this application. But now you can see now the user's operation are completed. And now we want to move on and now we want to work on the tweets operations as well. So let's move on and let's just work with the tweets. So inside the API, I'll create a new folder that can be, we can have the tweets. And from the tweets, now we can have the new file that can be, we can have the route.ts. So we can have the route.ts and inside down there, now what do we want to do? So again, we want to create the get and the post requests inside the tweets. So let's move on. Let's just copy that down there. Let's just copy and let's close all of the files. So let's move on to the tweets and you can see now we have the get function. And instead of the users, that can be equals to we have the tweets. And then what do we want to do? So here that can be tweets and there's it can be the tweets. That's how it's going to work. So we have the get function that is ready. We have the get function which will find all of the tweets from the database. Then it will send that to the front end. Now we need to move on and then let's just move on with the sign up route as well. We can just copy the whole thing down there. We can just move on. We can just have with this as well. We can paste that down there. So now what do we want to do? So inside the request, now we'll be getting the tweet data inside down there. So we'll be getting the tweet data. So the data that would be getting there is we will be getting the tweet itself. So if we see the schema down there, you have here the tweet itself. So you get the tweet. So we'll be getting the tweet down there. Then we'll be getting the user ID as well. So we'll be getting the user ID down there. And now we need to just check the validation. Like if we don't have the tweet, or if we don't have the user ID, then we want to send this response like we have the invalid data. And now the next step would be inside this function. You can see you need to just remove everything down there. So you can just remove everything. So what do we want to do as the next step? You can see now you got the user ID as well. So now first you need to have the validation, like if the user is actually present inside the database. So you can have the if check, you can have if, or we can have the user. So we can have the const, we can have the is, we can have the user. So that is equals to we can have the await, we can have the Prisma again dot we can have the user dot we can have the find first, which have the where that is equals to this ID. So where that we have, so where we have the ID that is a user ID that we got, and there we have validation like if, like we can have the validation like if we don't have the user. So if we don't have the user, then what do we want to do? So we can just move on with the return statement once again. So we can have the return statement like this. So we have the return, we can have the message, then we can have the invalid user down there. Invalid user down there, and that's how it's going to work. The status can be again the 401. So that's how it's going to work. And this await to connect DB should be moved on to the top like there. So we have the await to connect DB. First we need to connect to database. Then we want to just check the user validation. Then we just want to create a brand new tweet. So we can have the const, we can have the tweet that should be equals to await. We can have the Prisma dot, we can have the tweet down there. We have the tweets dot, we can have the create. So we can have the create down there, and that should be equals to the data that we want to send. The data should be there inside the object, and the data should be this. We have the tweet, and then we'll be getting the user as well. So we'll be getting the user ID that we have. These are the only two parameters that we want to send. So everything should be working perfectly fine. So the names are conflicting. So we'll be having the new tweet down there. So we have the new tweet down there, and that's how it's going to work. And after that, we need to just copy the return statement once again. So we can just paste that down there. We can have the tweet itself. So we can have the tweet that should be equals to a new tweet that we have. So everything should work perfectly fine, and the status should be 200. So with that step, you can see now we have created a new post request for the tweet as well. So let's just test it out. So we can move on. So we can have the post function. So we can just copy that, copy URL. We can create a new tab. We have this function down there. Then we can have the body, the raw, we can have the JSON over there. Then we can move on. We can provide that JSON over there. Then we can provide the JSON. The JSON can be, we can have the tweet. So that should be equals to my first tweet. And then what do we want to do is the next step. So we can have the user ID as well. So we can have the user ID that I think we have missed a comma down there. So here we have the user ID, and that should be the user ID that we have. So we need to get all of the users. We have the users, and we can just click on the send. So we should be getting the users down there. So here we have the user ID. We can copy and then we can just paste it down there. So let's just click on the post. Now we have the route, which is the API / we can have the tweets like that. So we have the tweets down there. We have the post request. So let's just click on the send. So let's see what happens. So you can see now the my first tweet has been created. You can see now you have the created date, you have the updated date. So everything seems to be working fine. And there you have the user ID as well, which is linked to this tweet. Then you can move on. You can just create another get request for the user. So now you should be getting the tweets as well with the user. And if you are not getting the tweets, you can move on to the users. You have the users. So after the find many, then you can move on. You can have the include property as well. And inside the include, you can have the tweets. So that should be equals to the true. And if you want to get the count of the tweets as well, so you can get the count. So that should be equals to the true. So if we move on and if we just click on this send once again, so now you should be getting the count of the tweets and the exact tweets as well, because now you have the query builder with the Prisma and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. Now you got the tweets and the count as well. So let's move on and let's just complete this API by building the update and the delete operations for the tweet as well. So let's move on. So inside the tweets, now what we need to do down there. So inside the API, let's just create another folder that can be a tweet like this. And inside this folder, now what do we want? I think we created that inside the users. So we need to create that inside the API. So you can see now you have a new folder that is a tweet, but this time this would be a dynamic route. So we want to make a request, like if you want to retrieve a tweet. So if you want to retrieve a tweet, that can be equals to tweet / any ID after that. So we want to get record of that tweet. And same would be used for the updation as well. If you want to update a tweet, then we'll be sending a different endpoint for that. And same would be used for the delete. So the ID can be dynamic. So it's not static. So it would be a dynamic. So we need to create the dynamic route over there. So we can create a folder that can be the square brackets ID. So that is known for the dynamic params. So that is known for the dynamic endpoint with the Next.js. And inside down there, we can have the route.ts file. So it is available inside this ID. So let's move on. Let's just have again the get request over there. So again, we can just move on. We can have the get request. So here we have the get. And this time now we'll be getting the ID as well. So inside the second parameter down there, we get the params object. So here we get the params. And it is of type of the params like that. So we have the params. Then we have the type of the ID and the ID is type of the string. So we have this pre-default params which is available with the Next.js. If you are using the dynamic route, then you need to get the ID as well. So from there, if you want to get a specific tweet, so that can be a tweet, then we can have the tweet down there. Tweets dot we can have the find first. So you can have the find first down there, and you don't need to use the include. And instead of find first, you can have the ID. You can have the where, that can be the ID. So you have the params dot you can have the ID. So you have the params.id, and I think the params has created a new property that should be only the ID like that. So you have the params.id like that. So we should remove that as well. So everything should work perfectly fine. So now you got the params, then you got the ID as well, and now you would be getting the tweet. And now what do we want to do? So now we would be sending the exact tweet like that. So the exact tweet would be sent there. So let's move on and let's just test it as well. So we have this tweet, or we can create another tweet as well. So you can see everything is fine. So now we are getting 2 tweets down there. And if you want to get the details of the second tweet, then we can move on. Then we can have the tweet. Then we can have the ID of the tweet. And if we just click on the send, now we should be getting this tweet down there. So like, I think we have an error like the API tweet. Then we have the ID. So something is wrong down there. So we are into the route.ts, into the tweet / ID. So I think something is wrong. So we are getting the tweet, we are getting the dynamic ID, then we have the route.ts. So I think maybe something is wrong. So okay, it's a get request. Sorry, it's a get request. So we need to click on the send. So now we should be getting the details of the tweet. So I think we are getting the invalid record, but the ID is different. So maybe something is wrong with that. So you can see now we are seeing the params down there. If we just log the params, so we have the params down there. So let's see what happens. If we just make the send request once again, you can see what we are doing. So we are getting the params, then we are getting the ID. So it means now we have the invalid record of the params. So to get the ID, then we need to use the params here once again. So that can be, we can have the params once again. So we were right earlier, I think. So that can be the params, then we would be having the ID like that. So that's how it's going to work down there. Now we have the params, or we can have the params.params.id. So now we would be getting the exact ID down there, and that's how it's going to work. So if we just click on this end once again, you can see now this is the ID that we want to get. So that's how it's going to work. So instead of using this, so we can have the context like that, or what we can do, so we can just destructure the whole property like that. So we have the params, so we can have the destructuring of the property like that, so we get the params. So now we can move on, we can remove the params object down there, and everything should work perfectly fine. So if we save and if we move on, if we just click on this end once again, so now we should be getting my second tweet. So you can see now we are getting the my second tweet, and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. So the error was, so something went wrong here on my side. So mistakenly I added the incorrect params for the ID. Now we want to create a new route that is for the update. So we can again copy and paste that down there. So after this, now we want to change the name to the put. So put is used for the updation. Then what do we want to do? So again, we have the params and everything is fine. Then we want to update the tweet itself. So we would be getting the tweet inside the JSON once again. So we can have const something that should be equals to request.json. And from the JSON, we would be getting the tweet data. So we get the tweet. And now what do we want to do as the next step? So now we won't be updating the user of the tweet because it is not relevant as for the application. So the user cannot be updated from the server, and that's the process of the web applications. So what do we want to do? So first we are getting the tweet down there. Then we want to just update the tweet directly. So we can move on. So here you can see now we have the tweet that can be equals to, we can have the updated tweet. So we can have the updated tweet down there. Then we can move on. So here we have the find first. Then we have this params.id. Then what we can do instead, so we can have the update. So here we have a function of the update, and there inside that, what do we need to do? So we have the update function, and from there we want to provide the data first. So the data that we want to update, that should be the tweet itself. So we would be having the tweet that should be updated, and then inside the second parameter, what do we want to do? So we need to add the where clause, and from the where clause we need to provide the id that should be equals to, we can have the params.id. So that's how it's going to work. So that's how it's going to work. You can see everything should work perfectly fine. Now we are getting the tweet. I think property tweet does not exist. So we have the updated tweet, and this time we can use the ts ignore file as well. So we can have the ts, we can have the ignore to ignore the type checking on the next line. So that's how it's going to work. So with that step, you can see now we are having the tweets.update, where the tweet, where the data is the actual tweet that we want to update, where the ID is this ID. So that's how we can just update a new tweet inside that. So everything should work perfectly fine. So here you can see we have an error, like we haven't added the await down there. So we have the await. So we need to add the await down there because it's a promise. And then now we can remove the ts ignore as well. So let's see that what happens if we move on. If we just click on the update down there, if we click on the put, then we want to update this tweet, which has this ID. Then if we want to just update the tweet text, so we can have the my updated text down there. So let's see what happens if we just click on the send. So we have a put request, we have the send point, we have the tweet that should be updated. So let's just click on the send to verify that. So let's see what happens now. You can see now we are seeing the exact details. Now we can see now we have the updated tweet, we have the created as well, and we have the updated as well. You can see now we have the different timestamp. So everything is working perfectly fine. The final thing that we want to do is we want to add the delete as well. Deleting the tweet would be very easy. So we just need to add a function of the delete. So that is a delete down there. And inside down there, now we just have the prisma.tweets. We can have the delete, where the ID is the params ID and the tweet would be deleted. So that's how it's going to work. So let's move on and let's just test it out once again. So we can have the delete as well. So here we have the delete and we have this ID down there. Now we can move on. We can just click on the send. So let's see that what happens now. You can see now we are getting the tweet which is deleted. So now let's just move on. Let's just get all of the tweets to see and verify that. So we can move on. We can have the API slash, we can have the tweets. So let's just click a get request on that. So now we will be seeing only one single tweet down there, which is my first tweet, my first tweet. And then you can see now the second tweet has been deleted and everything is working perfectly fine. And now we have created this API. You can see now we have created this full API of the Twitter. You can see now we are getting the tweet by its ID. We can update or delete, we can put. So the whole CRUD operations is completed. So that's how we create the applications like this. So that's it for now.